Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Wells, and I write horror, science fiction, and fantasy, and I review games on the internet. Today, the one that I want to look at is one of the most stunningly unique and innovative game systems that I have ever played, which is 7th Sea Second Edition. 7th Sea is a swashbuckling game. It's kind of a Three Musketeers. I'm not entirely certain how to describe it. 17th century Europe with pirates and swashbucklers and adventuring and swinging from chandeliers and all of that kind of stuff, plus magic. It isn't actually real Europe, and we'll get into that in a bit. It's kind of fake magical Europe. It's a world called Theah, but it's super cool. And one of the things that I like about it, one of the reasons I find it so innovative, is that it is an incredibly narrative system, by which I mean summarizing, grossly summarizing the kind of gamist, simulationist, narrativist theory. 7th Sea is a system that gives the players a ton of narrative control in how they're going to go about doing things. So, as an example, in the rule book, when it's describing how to do things, how to do fight scenes, how to do rolls, and so on, it has a whole little paragraph with the header, I dodge. And there is makes a big point about the fact that there is no dodge skill in the game. Because dodge, if you succeed or if you fail, either way, nothing really changes, right? You either get hit or you don't. And what this game wants you to do at every step of the way is encourage you to come up with something more interesting. So if you're in the middle of a sword fight with somebody in a ballroom, then instead of just saying I dodge, what it wants you to say is, well, I slash the rope that's holding up the chandelier and fly up into the balcony. Or I kick the candelabra and the hot wax goes flying into their eyes, and so he misses me. So it's the same kind of concept. You don't get hit by the sword. But instead of just kind of this nebulous dodge action, what's actually happening is something narrative, something interesting, something that advances the story or reveals your character or is exciting or funny or something, some kind of storytelling element. And that is what they're constantly trying to do with the game. So it's a really cool game, and we're going to get into a little later. But before we get into the mechanics, I'm actually going to save them for last this time because I want to show a lot of other cool stuff. Like I said, this is like a swashbuckling Europe. Now, what you see here on the screen, I've got this little PDF up. I don't actually own the PDF of this game. I own the hardback book, big fancy book, and it's really cool. You know, nice big thick thing. But I don't own the PDF for it. So what we're going to be looking at today is actually the quick start guide. But the cool thing about the quick start guide is that it's free on their website, and all of the basic rules you need to play a basic game are in here. It doesn't have all of the dueling styles, it doesn't have all the magic, it doesn't have extensive world information that the hardback book does have. But the quick start guide does explain how the game works, and it lets you try it out, and it's super cool. So we're going to be going through that today so that you can see it, and you can just go to their website and download it for free and try it out. So let's take a look first at the nations. We're going to go boom, and then we're going to jump down here. So, like I said, this is fake magical Europe. And Warhammer, for example, is like a kind of Renaissance era, gross, dirty Germany, fake Europe. Theah, the world of 7th Sea, is more of a 17th century musketeer movie Europe, right? This is so we can look at this. Then Avalon is England, Castile is Spain, Eisen is Germany, Montaigne is France, Sarmatian Commonwealth is kind of Poland, Lithuania mixture. Usura is Russia. Vestenmenevenjar is Norway, Sweden, kind of Viking nations. It's also got a lot of Denmark, Netherlands in there as well. And then Vodachi is Venice, which was the center of European commerce for a very long time. Someone in the chat pointed out that they backed this on Kickstarter. And this was a big Kickstarter a while ago. I did not back it on Kickstarter, unfortunately, but I did get a chance to play it and then immediately bought a copy of the core book because it's super neat. So all of these, so like Castile, for example, it is Spain, but it isn't really Spain. It's a slightly different version of Spain, but it does, a good job of kind of resonating with what we know about European history while also adding cool stuff on top to make it new and unique. There's kind of an analog for the Catholic Church, which is the Vatican Church, and there's an analog for the Protestant movement, which is what they call objectionists. And there's different analogs to all of this stuff, plus a lot of the folk tales and fairy tales and monster stories that exist in all these nations are true, and so you get to fight the monsters. Plus, there's the ongoing politics as the different people battle with each other, and every nation has its own kind of magic. That's one of the really fun things about this, is that every single group has a different magic system. And so depending on where you're from, you will have learned a different tradition of magic, assuming you know any magic at all. It's all just really well done. Let's take a look now. We're going to start getting into some of the mechanics of this. So we're going to look at our character sheet. I always like to show off the character sheet. Now this looks like it is going to be a little more familiar than it actually is. Okay? It's got traits and it's got skills, and when you want to take an action, you count up how many points in the trait, you count up how many points in the skill, and you roll that many dice, right? We've looked at so many role-playing games that follow that same basic system. So let's say that you are trying to pick a lock, okay? That is going to be wits and theft, probably. The GM will tell you what it is. So you take how many dice you have in wits, how many dice you have in theft, you get your whole dice pool, and you roll them, and that's how it works. It's different though, and we're going to explain how in a bit, because it's not just one die roll per action. In many senses, you're just going to have one die roll per scene, and then you take turns telling each other stories about what happens in that scene. We'll get into more of that later on. But that's how the traits work. And then I want to show you this death spiral. This isn't really hit points in any sense. But it's kind of a neat new innovation on how a hit point system can work. So the death spiral is how many wounds you can take. The circles are normal wounds, and the stars are what they call dramatic wounds. And some weapons, such as a firearm, a pistol or a rifle, can actually cause a dramatic wound right off the bat, and you just scratch that off. But most things, if you get into a sword fight, if you get into a fist fight, you're going to start marking off the normal wounds. And normal wounds, these kind of just little round ones, don't matter as much. And they're much easier to heal, they're much easier to recover from, whereas the dramatic wounds, those are the ones that really count. And depending on how many dramatic wounds you have, there's a bunch of different effects that will take place. Interestingly, and I love this, when you just have your first dramatic wound that you take, you now get a bonus to all of your risks, and the risks are the die rolls. So you get a +1 bonus to that. And so you've been wounded, but you're not dying yet. Now you're on fire. Now you're running hot, and you're ready to go. And when you take your second one, villains suddenly gain 2 bonus dice on everything. And so the more wounded you get, there's a lot of, again, narrative storytelling effects that start to take place. So the death spiral is kind of a neat thing. Now, we're going to go back to these quick start rules and jump to the end. It's got a cool adventure in it, and it also has some characters. So you can see what these characters actually look like in practice. So this is Domenica Vespucci. She's from Vodacce. That's the Venice analog. And she is kind of a wizard, courtier, kind of that kind of a person. If we want to look at some of the others, here's Ennio Vespucci, also from Vodacce, but he is a duelist. He's a swashbuckler. And so we can see that they're very different. He has 4 in panache. You can tell what kind of a game this is when one of your 5 core attributes is panache. And then he's also got weaponry. So if he wants to, high weaponry, if he wants to get into a flashy sword fight where he's just going to show off how cool he is, then he's rolling 7 dice for that, which is pretty neat. Okay? And then he's got all these advantages like Duelist Academy, and the dueling gets explained in the rules. And if you get the full big book, there's a ton of different dueling styles that all have very interesting but also very simple effects of how to apply them in combat. He's got hard to kill, so that instead of 4 dramatic wounds, he has 5, and there's neat things like that. Indomitable will. After another character attempts to intimidate, seduce, or otherwise goad you, he can spend a hero point to automatically resist. Hero points are things that can add extra dice into a check. They can activate powers just like this, and you gain hero points back through using your quirks. Most characters will have a couple of quirks, and these are kind of to guide your role playing. And so he is, for example, a bravo. Earn a hero point whenever you put yourself in danger to defend the life of the person you're sworn to protect. And duelist, earn a hero point when you resort to the edge of your blade to defend a noble ideal. So if you see those characters in movies or in books who are always getting into unnecessary fights, and violence isn't the answer, but for them, violence is always the answer. This is a cool storytelling mechanic that will incentivize that exact kind of behavior. If there's a problem he can solve with his sword, he's going to do that because it'll earn him a hero point. Okay. The other neat thing that the other way to earn hero points are through your hubris. Everyone has a virtue, which is something that you are good at or some good quality. And then everyone has a hubris, which is a bad quality, a character flaw of some kind. And in the case of Ennio Vespucci, he is a hothead. He receives a hero point when it flies off the handle and loses his temper, causing trouble. And so all of these powers, all of these advantages and hubrises and so on are all there to kind of guide you toward a particular style of play. Go back and take a look at Domenica Vespucci. She's completely different. Her hubris is arrogant. She receives a hero point when she shows disdain, contempt, or otherwise looks down on a villain or someone who could cause harm to her friends. And so that's going to guide her into a completely different style of play. And she has, the complete opposite of Ennio's duelist power. She has a courtier. Earn a hero point when you turn the tide of violence with charm and flair. So she talks her way out of problems, and that's how she wants to go about everything. And so you can see how the characters work. You can get a kind of feel for them. Now, finally, I'm going to show you how the risks work. Okay, so let's go back up. I'm going to show you a different page of this. Is this the right page? Okay, that's where we were before. Traits, skills, blah, blah, blah. Here we go to taking risks. So let's say that Ennio Vespucci, that we just looked at, he is going to get into a sword fight. And really, it's not so much the sword fight here, it is the situation. The game master describes something and says, okay, here's the problem. Let's go back to that lock-picking idea. Okay? Let's say that the characters are standing outside of some big manor house in the countryside and that they need to sneak into it. And the game master will describe and say, well, okay, here's the situation. What do you want to do? And one of the characters will say, I am going to try to pick the lock and break in and be as sneaky as I can. And so then the game master will say, well, that sounds like wits and theft. Roll your dice. And one of the other characters will say, well, I'm going to keep an eye out for other problems. I'm going to make sure that nobody sees us. Okay, well, in that case, maybe this is going to be wits and notice. Okay? And then each character is going to describe their approach to the scene, kind of the general sense of how they're going to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And then you gather your dice pools, and before you roll the dice, after the characters say what they're going to do, the game master will describe consequences. Okay, and so they'll say, picking the lock, it's going to take 1 raise for that, and your consequence of failing is that something more interesting than just you can't get in. Maybe you automatically pick the lock either way, but if you don't get the raise that you need, then you've scraped the lock really loudly, and so somebody has heard you. Or maybe you have broken the lock altogether. You've left some kind of evidence behind so that when a guard comes by, they'll see that the lock has been broken into. And things like that. They're going to describe all the consequences, and they're going to say how many raises it takes to get through. Then everybody rolls their dice, and what you're trying to do is get raises. You can see here on the page what a raise is. You have your pool of dice, and you will group them together so that they add up to 10. So if I've got a 7 and a 3, I will set them aside, and that's a single raise. If one of the dice was a 10, I'll set that over, and that's another raise. And I'll figure out how many raises I have. And then that's how many things I can do during the scene. I might have to spend some of them to accomplish the things I initially set out to do, right? Picking the lock, noticing the guards, whatever other things. Maybe one of the other characters is trying to scale a wall and get in through a window. We spend our raises to accomplish kind of the bare mechanics of what we first intended. And then if we have extra raises, we can do extra things with them. And the GM can describe opportunities as well. While you are sneaking through that kitchen that you just picked the lock to get into, if you want, there's an opportunity to spend a raise and notice something valuable, or grab a butcher knife off the counter so that you have a weapon, or something like that. Okay? And so you get to spend the raises, and you go back and forth between the players and the GM spending these raises to add elements into the story, to advance it. And so it's not, like I said, it's not one roll per action. It can be in a very tense combat situation, but for the most part, you're just going to be saying, well, I spend my raise to pick the lock, and then I'm going to spend another raise to be very sneaky. And as long as you're staying within your approach, for that lockpick guy, it was wits and theft. As long as he's staying in there, then he can spend those raises to do things. I'm going to spend 1 raise to, steal some money that I find on the counter, things like that. If you need to change your approach halfway through the scene, then that'll cost you extra raises as well. And so you go through and you try to accomplish all of these things, and it's a really neat system. Let me show you. This book has, like I said, where is it? Yeah, here we go. It has an adventure in the back, and it's split into 2 sections, and it's a really great thing. And it, uses these little pre-gen heroes, and there's the 2 things. And the very first thing that happens, this isn't a spoiler, because it's literally the very first thing that happens in the adventure, is this, and I'm going to read it to you. Escape your pursuers. This little encounter teaches your players how to roll and read the dice. Read or paraphrase the text below. As you run through the burning castle, beams fall from above, crashing down all around you. You burst through a doorway into the ballroom, flames licking at the walls. Behind you, guards wearing Sabbat colors shout for you to halt. Then, from the balconies above, you see an assortment of crossbows and muskets leveled at you over the railings, too many to fight. You know that if you can make it to the far side of the room and through a nearby study, there is a window that overlooks the docks. If you can make it there, you can surely escape the city before the noose closes around your neck. What do you do? So then we know what the situation is. and the players start talking about how they want to approach it. And so we do the thing. They describe their approach. They gather their dice, and then we lay out what the consequences are going to be. And in this case, they're very simple. Your risk, what you're actually trying to do, is get to the other side of the room so that you can go into that study. And the consequence is 8 wounds, okay? Which will be, if you remember the death spiral, 1 dramatic wound and then some other normal wounds. And so then the players roll and they count up their raises, and they can just go and they can start describing cool things that they do. It gives some examples here. Dodge a burning beam that suddenly falls from the ceiling. Flip a table on its side and take cover behind it. There's all these things you can spend raises on in the service of getting across that room and out of the musket fire in the most entertaining and dramatic way possible. And then once you get over there, then there's all these other things that are going to happen, and you meet other people. You can do other fun stuff. So it's a really great system. It is a unique system. And unless you've played something very, I don't even know what to say. It is very unlikely that you've played a system like this before, because it is such a new and innovative kind of thing. And I really love it. What I would love to do just in closing is show off some of the other books in the line. Okay, I only have the core book, but filling out my collection of this one is one of my top priorities in terms of game acquisition. There are a lot of other games in the line and other source books. This one, Crescent Empire, is kind of the Middle East. It starts with the core book, just with Europe. But as you add in some of these, it adds a ton of extra books that cover a huge portion of the world. So it doesn't have to stay limited just to Western or Central Europe. Okay? I would consider Crescent Empire to be the only book that is not mandatory, but your first priority once you want to expand your collection. And I say that because not only is it adding the Middle East, but it is also adding the extra religions, the Muslim analog and the Jewish analog. At least for my own personal preference, I don't think you can properly tell a European history story without, the full suite of religious conflict that comes from having not just the Catholic Church and the Protestants, but also, the Jewish underdogs that everyone was picking on, and the Muslim side coming in. And so, like I said, they're not exactly those religions, but it widens the scope, and it gives you all of these extra flavors to work with and extra things. There's kind of the basic books are called the Nations of Theah, which just go into a lot more detail on those basic countries. But they've also got a New World book. They've got Land of Gold and Fire, which is Africa. That's right. And then they have just announced a Kickstarter for a Chinese source book. That is the China-Asia as analog for the world of Theah. So a lot of really neat books. They're all gorgeous, and the basic play system, even once you start adding in magic on top and dueling on top of that, is still very simple, very fluid, and gives you all the tools to just tell a great story. So I'm a big fan of this game, and I hope that you guys get a chance to try it. If you've got the book because you kickstarted it and just haven't had a chance to play it yet, go grab it off the shelf and grab some people. If you just want to try out the rules, like I said, the quick start is on their website for Chaosium, and it's totally free. So you can download it and try it out. Anyway, 7C is awesome. I hope you love it as much as I do. And thanks for joining me today. I am going to sign off, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.